You probably think oil prices are set by OPEC decisions, by American inventory reports, by growth data from China, a complex market with dozens of variables pulling in every direction. That is the standard model. The market sets the price. But here is what those models leave out. Every barrel produced inside the Persian Gulf has to get out. It has to leave the Gulf and reach the open ocean somehow. The Persian Gulf is almost entirely enclosed by land on every side. There is one opening, a single gap in the eastern corner, one opening. That is all the Gulf's oil has. The Strait of Hormuz, between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. At its narrowest, the strait is about 33 kilometers wide, from Iran's Larak Island down to Oman's Musandam Peninsula. The Iranian shoreline forms the entire northern edge of the passage, while Oman's Musandam Peninsula forms the southern jaw of the passage. 33 kilometers, less than a 20-minute drive on a highway. The entire world's oil through 33 kilometers of water. But the full width of the strait is not even what tankers use. The IMO established a traffic separation scheme back in 1973. 2 shipping lanes, each exactly 3 kilometers wide, plus a 3-kilometer buffer zone separating the 2 directions of traffic. 9 kilometers total. That is the real corridor for all global tankers. 6 miles of open water for the whole planet's oil supply. All commercial energy trade funneled through that single narrow corridor. A fully loaded supertanker barely fits inside one of those lanes. Now let's look at what actually moves through here every single day. In 2024, roughly 20.3 million barrels of oil per day transited the Strait of Hormuz, every single day without exception. That is 20% of all petroleum consumed on the planet. 1 in 5 barrels burned anywhere on Earth crossed this corridor. Europe's refineries, Asia's power plants, all fed through this one passage. The peak came in 2018 and again in 2022, 21 million barrels a day. Then OPEC Plus cut production, and the volume through the strait eased slightly. Production quotas tightened. The flow of tankers slowed just a touch. The numbers dipped a little. The geography did not move at all. This is a structural reality, not a market fluctuation. The strait was here long before oil markets ever existed, and that is the geography that every oil price model is built around. So who actually depends on that strait the most? Start with Saudi Arabia, the biggest player in the room. In 2024, Saudi Arabia accounted for 38% of all crude flowing through Hormuz. That is roughly 5.5 million barrels every single day. Iraq was second at around 22 to 23%. The UAE third at about 13. 3 countries, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, make up nearly 3/4 of the flow. Now here is where it gets uncomfortable for the smaller players. Kuwait and Bahrain have 0 bypass options. None. If the strait closes, their oil simply has nowhere to go. Iraq does have a pipeline north to Turkey, but it barely works. Recurrent outages, political disputes, it is not a reliable alternative. Only Saudi Arabia and the UAE have real bypass infrastructure, and even they cannot replace the strait on their own. We will get to the numbers, but first, Qatar. And Qatar is a different kind of problem entirely. Qatar supplies 19% of all LNG traded on the planet, liquefied natural gas, the fuel that heats European homes and runs Asian factories. Every single Qatari LNG facility sits at Ras Laffan on the northeastern coast. The only way out is through the strait. There is no road around it. LNG has to be cooled to minus 162 degrees Celsius to become liquid. You cannot pump it through a conventional pipeline. It would boil off immediately. It needs specialized cryogenic tankers, and those tankers need open sea. Close the strait, and Qatari LNG exports simply stop. 93% of Qatar's LNG transits Hormuz. Every shipment, no exceptions. That is not a vulnerability you can engineer your way out of in a decade. Now add the legal dimension. Wait, and this is where it gets truly strange. Iran and Oman both claim 12 nautical miles of territorial sea. The strait is only about 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Those 12-mile zones overlap completely. There is no neutral corridor. Every single ship passing through is inside Iranian or Omani sovereign waters. Under international law, that triggers a right called transit passage. Transit passage cannot be suspended, even by the bordering state. That protection is written into UNCLOS, the global law of the sea. Iran never ratified UNCLOS, never. Iran only accepts innocent passage, a weaker right that can be legally suspended. So Iran has both the geographic leverage and a legal pretext to match it. Geography handed Iran the lock. International law handed it the key. The obvious question? Why not just build a pipeline around it? Saudi Arabia asked exactly that question in the 1980s. The Iran-Iraq war was raging and tankers were being attacked. So Saudi Arabia built the Petroline. 200 kilometers of pipe. It runs from Abqaiq in the east all the way to Yanbu on the Red Sea. 7 million barrels per day. That is its maximum capacity. 7 million barrels a day sounds like a lot. The UAE then added its own pipe, Habshan to Fujairah, 380 kilometers. The AD-COP pipeline adds another 1.8 million barrels per day of capacity. So before the 2026 war, the IEA estimated combined spare capacity at 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day, but the strait moves 20 million barrels every single day. Even on the best day, the pipelines cover less than 30%. Kuwait has no bypass at all. Neither does Iraq or Bahrain. And Qatar, the world's top LNG exporter, has zero alternatives. Qatar cannot ship a single molecule of gas without going through the strait. 60 years of engineering, and the choke point still holds. Now let's talk about what that leverage actually looks like in practice. Before the war, 138 ships transited the strait each day. Nearly 3,000 ships transited the strait every month. Between 50 and 60% of those ships were tankers, oil, and LNG. Hormuz is the world's most important oil transit choke point, ahead of even Malacca. February 28, 2026. The United States and Israel struck Iran. The missiles hit. The region held its breath. 6 days later, on March 4th, Iran made its move. Iranian forces declared the Strait of Hormuz closed. They began attacking ships attempting to transit the strait. The UKMTO received report after report of attacks on vessels. Over a dozen ships were hit in and around the strait in just days. The CRS confirmed it. Iran had carried out those threats. Traffic through the strait collapsed almost immediately. From 138 ships per day before the war, down to just 2 to 6 ships per day. 138 ships a day, down to 2 in a week. The Brent crude price crossed $100 a barrel almost overnight. European spot prices for LNG quadrupled in less than 2 weeks. And at the pump in Chicago, the price of a gallon of gas rose by $1. Ordinary Americans felt it, not as a geopolitical headline, but at the gas station. The geography had not moved a single centimeter. The strait, still 33 kilometers wide, 9 of navigable water. The rock does not move. The price does. Then March 2026 arrived, and the theory became real. Ships stopped moving through the strait. On a normal day, about 138 ships passed through Hormuz every 24 hours. In the first week of March, that number fell to 6. 6 ships from 138. At the peak of the crisis, Argus Media confirmed just 1 or 2 tankers a day. Cape Healer counted just 99 vessels for the entire first 18 days of March. Just 99 ships in the first 18 days of March. That is a drop of roughly 95 to 97%. The strait didn't close, it just emptied. And the markets responded immediately. By March 12th, Brent crude crossed $100 a barrel. $100 per barrel, a threshold the market had not seen in years. Shipping the oil was its own problem on top of that. VLCC freight rates hit a record $400,000 a day. That is up 94% in a matter of days. Every tanker captain willing to make the run demanded a premium for the risk, and Americans felt it at the pump almost immediately. Average U.S. gasoline hit $3.94 a gallon, nearly $1 more per gallon than before the war began. $1 a gallon, for a war happening 6,000 miles away. Goldman Sachs suggested those elevated prices could last through 2027. Natural gas tells an even starker story. Now think about natural gas, because that story is even starker. Qatar is the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. 93% of Qatar's LNG exports must pass through Hormuz, and there is no alternative route. There is no bypass for LNG, none. When the strait is blocked, Qatari LNG doesn't slow. It stops entirely. European spot LNG prices quadrupled in under 2 weeks during the 2026 blockade. Quadrupled. In under 2 weeks, European households and factories saw energy bills spike with no warning. And remember, this wasn't because Qatar stopped producing. The gas was there. The ships were there. The strait was not. Then there are the insurance rates. A quieter but equally brutal signal. By July 2026, insurance rates through Hormuz had reached 4 times the 5-year average. That means the cost of moving oil was already elevated, even during calmer periods. Iran doesn't even need to fire a shot. The threat alone does the work. Markets price in, risk the moment tension rises, not the moment a ship is hit. The geography is the weapon. It works whether the strait is open or closed. Then 2026 turned the theory into a live demonstration. Conflict escalated in the Gulf, and ships stopped moving. Before the crisis, around 138 ships transited Hormuz every single day. Within days of the escalation, that number collapsed to between 2 and 6. From 138 ships a day down to 6 in days. Oil markets didn't wait for analysts. Brent crude shot toward $100. European buyers scrambling for LNG saw spot prices quadruple in 2 weeks. Quadruple in 14 days. And in Chicago, the price of a gallon of gas climbed by $1. Nobody in Chicago voted on the Strait of Hormuz. Nobody chose this. Geography did. Geography decided. Now remember the bypass pipelines. The supposed safety valve. In April 2026, Iran launched missile strikes on Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline. The strikes cut throughput by roughly 700,000 barrels per day. That is nearly a tenth of the pipeline's total maximum capacity wiped out overnight. And Iran didn't stop there. Drones hit the port of Fujairah. Fujairah is the terminal where UAE crude exits the bypass pipeline. With Fujairah under attack, crude loading operations ground to a halt. The bypass was not a backup. It was another target. Bypass infrastructure is a military target, not a solution. So where does that leave us? Let's take the full picture. 20% of the world's oil moves through a channel 9 kilometers wide. One country, Iran, sits on the northern shore and controls the choke point. Iran never ratified the treaty that would strip it of that legal leverage. The bypass pipelines cover at most 27% of normal volume. And for Qatari LNG, the fuel heating European homes, there is no bypass at all. No bypass, no alternative, no plan B for LNG. The threat alone, not a closure, is enough to move markets. Insurance premiums spike, spot prices jump, and the strait is still open. The weapon works whether the strait is open or closed. This is not about OPEC quotas or American inventory reports or Chinese demand forecasts. All of that analysis assumes a market that can physically move its product. The strait is the physical constraint that sits underneath every model. 60 years of pipelines, tankers, and geopolitical engineering haven't changed that. The geology is millions of years old. The choke point predates every nation that borders it. The map was drawn before the countries. The strait doesn't care who's in charge. Not OPEC. Not the Fed. The strait is the price floor.